and a gentleman to the well-being of the black man and to the emancipation of our race and to the beautification or having our nation, Nigeria, fulfill its purpose and be a great place where everyone can enjoy and fulfill their potential. If Singapore can be great, if Malaysia can be on the path of greatness, if Dubai, that 40 years ago was a virtual desert, can be what it is today, how can Nigeria, with all the great potential that God has bestowed us with, be great? So over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of research, thinking, planning, praying, meditating, and consulting various people on what really is, number one, the foundation of Nigeria. What was Nigeria founded on? Why? The Bible says, if the foundation be destroyed, if the foundation is bad, the building will not be appropriate. It says, what can the righteous do? If you try to do right things on a bad foundation, it is unlikely that it will succeed. So the foundation and the founding of Nigeria. Secondly, on the history and the interaction of Nigeria, especially among the tribes. And then thirdly, on the situation of Nigeria and what we can do to make Nigeria good and to ensure there's the right kind of leadership in every facet of Nigeria and in non-governmental Nigeria, so that we can really have a beautiful, beautiful country.
Yes, I believe you grew up in Ibadan. Correct. What was life like? Could you tell us about education from primary to secondary up to the point you moved to Lagos, and what you think those of us who are growing up today can learn from that experience?
Well, I was born at the tip of independence in 1961. So Nigeria was coming out of British colonial rule. Ibadan was the biggest city in West Africa at that time. I grew up, first of all, in Western region before it became Western State in 1966-67. And we had the vestiges of colonial influence in Ibadan. It was an idyllic town of great population. I grew up without barbed wires. I grew up without walls separating houses. I grew up without burglary proof. I grew up on what they call the rotary phone, and I grew up on the black and white television, where pounds at that time, before the decimalization, we grew up with people driving right-hand driven cars, and therefore you drove on the left side of the road. So it was in our very presence that Gowon changed us to left-hand driven cars and the campaign at that time. It was in our presence that Gowon decimalized our currency and the Naira, apparently the name given by Chief Awolowo, which was equal to 10 shillings at that time, was what we took over with. And that Naira was the equivalent of about £1 or 95 or 98 pence at the time. And it was about the equivalent of $2 at the time. I remember going abroad in 1978 for summer, and I took £5 and stamped my passport. 300 Naira bought me a ticket to London, return ticket on Nigerian Airways. So with 800 Naira, I had a very, very good summer holiday. Spent 4 weeks in London, brought back 2 or 3 suitcases, and had begun my next school term. I didn't have to queue in British Embassy to get a visa. I walked to the British Consul's office in Dugbe, in Ibadan. I was about 16 or 17 years old. I simply told him I wanted to go to London. I showed him an airway letter of invitation from my in-law. We had this airway, blue air. I'm sure you know, Dele, you probably whatever they call it, light letters that came quicker than the ones in envelopes.
The telegram.
Not telegram. Airmail. They used to call it airmail. It was blue. You wrote on it and then you stuck it together and then you put it in the post. It was a very light letter. Instead of using an envelope, you wrote on that. It was blue thing. And I showed him that and told him I was going to London for vacation. He didn't ask me who my father was, who my mother was, what they did or anything. He says, okay, no problem. He said, come back in 2 days for your visa. And I got my visa for... and the next year I went to London for UK for school. It was very simple, very easy, very predictable life. There were lots of industries being established. Education was free. Okay, you had the model schools, ICC, and so on and so forth, established by Awolowo since the 50s. Everybody who wanted to go to school was allowed to go to school. Some schools ended in more than 3, and then went to University of Ibadan, which was one of the best universities in Africa, possibly in the Commonwealth. UCH was the 4th best hospital in the Commonwealth. You had Indians coming to Nigeria to learn medicine and to practice and so on and so forth. Everything was orderly. Kingsway stores, Leventi stores, Father Christmas Grotto. You bought anything you wanted on the streets of Nigeria. And Nigeria could feed itself. Even the oil wasn't there at the time. We lived on crop of cocoa, palm kernel, cotton, groundnuts, and palm oil. Those were the cash crops that we studied in school, and so on and so forth. So we had a beautiful country that was planned, 5-year development plan, 10-year development plan. My mother was permanent secretary, economic planning, then permanent secretary information, then permanent secretary home affairs. She was a top woman, permanent secretary at that time, the first lady permanent secretary. And that's the way we grew. You know, everybody respected the rule of law. There was minimal corruption at the time. Judges were feared, lecturers were respected, teachers were admired, and civil servants were on top at that time. But it's a robbery. I said we didn't have burglary proof. You know, low hedges, round houses in DRA. There was no need for all those things. If you caught a thief, he probably stole a few tomatoes or a goat in the market, and people would promptly round him up and deal with him. Or they ask you what's his father's name and take him back to his father's compound. There was peace in Nigeria until the Civil War started. Okay, and even during the Civil War, we still were able to maintain a decent economy on the federal side. Our Easterners, they had a lot of problem and challenge. Do that Civil War, Awolowo was Minister of Finance, and we came out of there and started building Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and Aramco, built Peugeot in Kaduna, started building the refineries and things like that. And Gawan said in that time that Nigeria's problem was not money, it was what to do with it. So this was the Nigeria we grew in at the time, and those were fantastic days. The only drawback was that the telecommunications was a bit poor. But if you had a phone, you could get your lines if you were patient enough to wait for the operator. Nigeria, we had a lot of promise. A lot of people looked at us and called us the giant of Africa and thought that within a few years we'll be almost first world. That was the promise that Nigeria gave the world, and that's what we were all looking forward to. I went to King's College in 1973, January. So that was my first move to Lagos. I was in the boarding house from 1973, January to 1977. Then I went back to Ibadan for my A-levels, 1977 to 1979. And then I
Where in Ibadan?
ISI, International School.
ISI, okay.
Which was also That was the family tradition. My sister did the same, Queen's College ISI. My brother also did the same, King's College ISI. And I followed that tradition. They both went to Tolu and also went to UI, but I decided to go to England for my university education. And I went to the University of Hull. So that's the time I now left home completely in 79. When I came back in 82 for my youth corps, I went to work in Lagos, in Price Waterhouse. And that's when I moved to Lagos. By this time, the trajectory of Nigeria was changing. Lagos had become the center of economic activity, and as at that time was the capital of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Ibadan had receded. By this time, it was now Western states getting into Oyo and Ogun states, and Lagos had been carved out, and Ibadan was being generally getting smaller and smaller in terms of activity and influence. Places like Akure were beginning to be built up because of these states, and so on and so forth. And this was how, and Abeokuta, of course, capital of Ogun State at that time. When the throes of the Second Republic, when I came back, Shehu Shagari was president of Nigeria at that time, before the 1984 coup that brought Buhari into power for the first time. Okay, and thereafter Babangida took over in August 1985, I think it was. And up until that 1985, although had become too corrupt, they had spent too much money, they had wasted our resource, they had started affecting our economy, which was the excuse that Babangida and co gave for taking over power from Shagari and so on and so forth. In retrospect, I don't agree with that excuse. I think they should have allowed our politics to evolve, and I'm sure that the corruption that they did was nowhere near what happened subsequently. But this was now the beginning of, I think, the downward spiral of the Nigerian economy, which eventually from subsequent devaluations. I think when Nigeria and the oil revenues were so humongous that we began to abandon and so on and so forth. I think if the military had left us back in our regional settings, and each region with a small central government, I think Nigeria would have prospered a lot better.
Fantastic. Now, the issue of unity is one that really concerns me. When you were in school, I heard you were classmates with the former Emir of Kano. What was unity like then? Was there this type of discrimination, north-south divide at that time?
King's College, the school that by the British in 1909 to build leaders, people they wanted to go into the civil service, people they wanted to go into military, people they wanted to be leaders of Nigeria, after the fashion of Eton. Eton is a public school in Britain, and it has produced about 20 or so, between 8 and 20 prime ministers in Britain. So King's College was actually, the school in Eton is called King's College upon Eton. So they formed King's College in that caliber. That was the school that Aida went to, Asiodu went to, Odumegwu Ojukwu went to, Prince the Ademiluis went to, the Apatas went to, quite a lot of them. And in the north, they established Barewa College to do something similar and produce quite a lot of leaders, and quite a lot of leaders from the north went through Barewa College. So King's College was formed as the first unity school, 12 states at the time, and therefore they took the best 3 from every from common entrance, and then the best 3 from every state to come into King's College. So we had a big spread. There was everybody from every state in King's